First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to module number 8, taking care of yourself. In this module, we are going to be talking about taking care of yourself. The most important aspect of doing foster parenting / resource parenting is taking care of yourself. Why? Because if your tank is empty, there is nothing you're going to be able to do to help the children that are in your home. And so it is actually one of the most important, if not the most important things to remember. Taking care of yourself is essential for the well-being of not only yourself, but also the children in your home. Secondly, I'd like to just thank everybody who has joined us on this journey, a small journey here through these 8 modules. Hopefully your time and the knowledge that you have acquired has been great. And again, hear from everybody at VMS. If you guys have any questions, concerns, things you guys want to talk about in regards to the trainings and or anything that we're doing here at VMS, please don't hesitate to give us a call. We also have a link on our website that you can send us an email, but if not, please give us a call here at our office. And without further ado, let's get going. Taking care of yourself. So we come to this module number 8, and we're going to be talking about taking care of yourself and why it's extremely important, both taking care of your physical health as well as your emotional health. Just like in the children that you work with in terms of being feeling psychologically safe and being physically safe, they are 2 different things. And just like that, you're taking care of your physical health and your psychological health are 2 different things in this context in which we're going to use them. But it is extremely important that as a resource parent, because you are the primary person that the children will be going to at all times. And so it is important for you to be the best you can be every day in order to be able to provide the best service for the children in your home. If we are not being the best that we can be every day, chances are that what we are able to provide may even at times trigger some of the children, and if not most of the children that we are working with. And so it's extremely important to be mindful of yourself, your needs, and anything that comes along with that. As caregivers, you guys also need care. Believe it or not, it's essential to your duty as a resource parent. Let me give you an example, and we've used this example very frequently. Have any of you ever been on a plane recently? Remember how the flight attendant always says, before assisting your child, put your own oxygen mask on first. It makes sense, right? Because you're not going to be much use to your child if you've passed out from oxygen deprivation. But how often in day-to-day life do we forget to put on our oxygen mask first? In our zeal to keep all the plates spinning, we put taking care of ourselves as our last priority. Then we wonder why we find ourselves exhausted, drained, frustrated, angry, resentful, and unable to take joy in the good work we do. Learning how to take care of ourselves is one of the most important skills we can develop as caregivers. And by modeling this, and how we take care of ourselves, we can help our children learn to take good care of themselves too. Again, our children are also observing how we do things and how we take care of ourselves. Part of it, taking care of yourself, is not only doing you good, but it's also doing the child good, because they are getting an appropriate model of what it's like to take care of themselves. Lastly, I think we all deserve a little tender love and care, right? I'm going to read the following to you. Yet, taught by time, my heart has learned to glow for others' good and melt at others' woe. Homer, 900 BC to 800 BC. I'm not talking about Homer Simpson, by the way. So when the philosopher Homer wrote these words more than 2,000 years ago, he was basically describing empathy, the ability to feel another's distress or pleasure as if it were our own. Empathy allows us to feel our children's pain, to understand what they need, and to connect with them. If we could not feel what they are feeling, we might not be able to reach them at all. Empathy is part of what makes us human, but it can also get us into trouble. How can empathy get us into trouble? Well, there is this term and this thing called compassion fatigue. What are some of the warning signs of compassion fatigue? This is what we're going to go over in a little bit. For many resource parents, the day-to-day grind of caring for a traumatized child, or, as it is often the case, a procession of traumatized children, take an emotional and physical toll. While the stress of parenting affects our own mental health and physical health and impairs our ability to parent effectively, we are suffering from compassion fatigue. How many of these signs of compassion fatigue do you have, or have you ever had? Have you ever felt mental and physical exhaustion? Have you ever felt the use of alcohol, food, or other substances to combat stress and comfort yourself? Have you ever had disturbed sleep? You're unable to sleep. Have you ever felt numb and distance from life in general? Have you ever felt less satisfied by not only work, but by the work you do anywhere daily? Have you ever had moodiness, irritability? What about physical complaints such as headaches and stomach aches? If you answered yes to more than 3 of these questions, you may be on your way to compassion fatigue. This is particularly likely when you neglect your own needs in an effort to be a perfect resource parent. This is more common than not, because we are caring individuals, and most of us, generally, I would say all of us, do this because we care about children. And we are caring individuals. Therefore, we are likely to suffer from compassion fatigue from time to time. It's important to note these warning signs because they can help us take action before we hit rock bottom. It's easy to lose track of your own needs when caring for children who have experienced trauma, but not taking care of yourself not only sets a bad example for your children, it also sets you up for compassion fatigue. To get a sense of where you fall on the self-care spectrum, try this highly unscientific little self-care checkup. So, in the attachments that are included, where the link to this video is, there is a worksheet called Self-Care Checkup. I want you to take the time to do this 12-question questionnaire and score yourself. Give yourself 3 points for every A answer, 2 points for every B answer, and 1 point for every C answer, and 0 points for every D answer. If you score from 24 to 36 points, congratulations. You seem to be maintaining a pretty good balance between taking care of others and taking care of yourself. Keep it up. If you score between 12 and 23, you're definitely doing some things to take care of your own needs, but you could probably do more. It may be time to make a stronger commitment to yourself by developing a self-care action plan. If you score anything below 12 points, it looks like you're doing a lot for other people and not much for yourself. All that time caring for others may be setting you up for compassion fatigue. It's time to make a self-care action plan. Later on in this module, we're going to talk about how to commit to a regular, sustainable plan for self-care. For now, let's just review a few of the basics. 1. Make sure you get enough sleep. Getting enough sleep most nights. For some folks, this is 6 hours a night. For others, it's 8. Eat well. Make sure you eat a healthful, balanced diet, including breakfast. Try to avoid eating on the run or behind your desk or in your car. 3. Be physically active. Get some form of regular physical exercise. It doesn't matter what it is. Includes walking up in the mornings. 4. Use alcohol in moderation or not at all. 5. Take regular breaks from stressful activities. Make sure you take regular breaks from stressful activities. Remember, non-stop parenting can be a stressful activity. Find a way, somehow, every day to have at least a few minutes to yourself. 6. Laugh every day. 7. Express yourself. Express yourself if you're feeling frustrated, sad, or angry. Be honest about your emotions before they get out of control. Tell your children or spouse calmly that you are angry before you fly off the handle. Express the positive as well by making time to engage in something that you love, such as a craft, a game, writing, painting, a sport. Finally, let someone else take care of you. By taking care of ourselves, we can reduce our risk of developing compassion fatigue and make it easier to face the challenges that come with parenting children who have endured trauma. In addition to compassion fatigue, there are other ways that parenting a traumatized child can affect us. Most surprising may be what happens when we start to feel almost as if our child's traumatic experience happened to us. This is called secondary traumatic stress, or STS. As a resource parent, you may be exposed to your child's trauma through what your child tells you or says in your presence, your child's traumatic play, drawings, or other representations of the trauma, observing your child's reaction to trauma reminders, or media reports, case reports, medical records, or other documents that detail the trauma. Exposure to your child's traumatic material can actually cause you to experience the same symptoms associated with traumatic stress. You may, 1, re-experience the trauma in the form of intrusive images you can't get out of your mind. 2, experience nervousness or jumpiness. 3, find it difficult to concentrate or take in information. 4, you may experience having nightmares about the trauma, insomnia, or fear of going to sleep because you don't want to dream about your child's experience. And 5, you can become emotionally numb or withdrawn or shut down to avoid thinking about the traumatic experience. Just as some traumatized children come to see the world as hopeless or indifferent to their pain, exposure to your children's traumatic experience may change your worldview, how you see and feel about your world. 2, leave you feeling hopeless or helpless. 3, make you feel angry at the world, or specifically at birth families, society, or even God. 4, It can cause you to feel separated from others and disconnected from your loved ones by what you've experienced. When you develop your own traumatic stress as a result of exposure to your child's trauma, you may 1. Lose perspective, identifying so closely with your child that you cannot operate effectively as a parent. 2. Respond inappropriately or disproportionately to your child. For example, you may attempt to cocoon your child from any possible trauma reminders. 3. Feel the need to withdraw and disengage. 4. Do anything to avoid further exposure. For example, you may not want to be alone with your child for fear he or she will talk about the trauma. Now let's look at a situation where the children's trauma history had an unexpectedly intense impact on a resource parent. As part of the worksheets that and attachments that are associated with this module, number 8, training on self-care, please direct yourself to the story of Ralph and Susan. Again, just a reminder, this story is attached to the attachments that are located on the website where you found the link to this video. We are going to be reading pages CS 23 to CS 25. I will read that for you, and then we will talk about it. We're going to talk about the case and the story of Ralph and Susan. Ralph and Susan are a couple in their 30s. They both had relatively happy childhoods and married right out of high school. Aside from a brief episode of depression when he, Ralph, was unemployed for 6 months, Ralph has had no psychological problems. Neither has Susan, although she considers herself a very sensitive person who always cries in movies and feels a lot of empathy for others, especially children. That is partly why they decided to become foster parents. 4-year-old Jody and her 18-month-old brother Jimmy came to live with Ralph and Susan 3 months ago. Shortly before coming to live with Ralph and Suzanne, the children witnessed their father fatally shoot their mother and then commit suicide. At age 4, Jody did not understand exactly what had happened. She saw a lot of scary blood, but did not understand that death was irreversible. Her father had told her not to go outside the apartment without a grown-up. Also, she did not want to leave her little brother alone, and she could not carry him by herself. So she stayed in the apartment with her parents' bodies and took care of her brother. At first, she tried to revive her parents by yelling at them to wake up, shaking them, and putting cereal in their mouths. She put a blanket over her mother. Then she did what she had watched her mommy do, fed her brother and changed his diapers, putting his dirty diapers in a neat pile on the bathroom floor so they would not stink up the house and make her daddy mad. Jimmy cried for his mother and became frustrated when Jody could not rouse her. Several times during the 2 days, he nestled in next to her body, seeking comfort. After 2 days, police arrived and took the children into custody. By the time Jody and Jamie came to live with Ralph and Susan, the details of their story had been all over TV and in the newspapers. Susan already had pictures in her head that came from this coverage. The children had tracked their parents' blood through the house on their footprints. Jody had tried to revive her parents. Jimmy had been found curled up in a fetal position in a corner by his mother's body. The children's response to trauma. When Jimmy first came to live with Susan and Ralph, he stopped walking and would crawl or pull himself along on the ground. When a loud noise startled him or something upset him, instead of crying, he would freeze in position and then lie flat on the ground. It made Susan wonder if he was imitating what his mother did when the bullet hit her. Susan would pick him up and hold him at these times. Jimmy also would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. Sometimes he could say enough to let Ralph and Susan know he'd had a nightmare. In her play, Jody would put a blanket over her doll again and again. When Susan first served the children Cheerios, Jody became upset, shook her head, and stared into space, but would not talk. She also became very upset when Susan put a red tablecloth on the table. Jimmy and Jody were both in treatment. After a while, Jody began to talk about the 2 days she had spent in the apartment with her brother. Every time she sat on the toilet to have a bowel movement, her memories would come up. It seemed as if being on the toilet reminded her of changing her brother's poopy diapers and stacking them up in the bathroom. Susan's traumatic stress reaction. Susan began to have symptoms of traumatic stress. When she was driving or trying to fall asleep, she would see images of the children's trauma. Images came from the media reports and also from what she could put together from what Jody had told her. She started to feel jumpy and anxious. She dreaded having to help Jody in the bathroom and having to hear what Jody might say next about the traumatic events. When Jimmy froze in his tracks, Susan would imagine his father shooting his mother. The sound of the blast and the splatter of blood. She started to feel uncomfortable around the color red and tried to protect Jody from any exposure to it. Suzanne's symptoms began to interfere with her life and her ability to take care of the children. Ralph's traumatic stress response. Ralph reacted very differently from Susan. He withdrew from the children and from Susan. He lost interest in being intimate with his wife and seemed emotionally flat. He lost faith in other people. If a man could do that to his wife while his children watch, then there's no hope for mankind, Ralph would say. There's so much evil in this world. What can anyone do about it? He questioned whether he and Susan could do the children any good at all. They're probably ruined for life, no matter what we do. Overcoming secondary traumatic stress. Susan and Ralph's reactions illustrate how disruptive and overwhelming secondary traumatic stress can be for resource parents. What are some things that Susan and Ralph can do and some steps they can take to help with this situation? Before we go on to that, let's review a little bit. So what do we have here? We have Ralph and Susan, who are a couple in their 30s. They both had relatively happy childhoods and married right out of high school. Aside from a brief episode of depression when Ralph was unemployed for 6 months, he had no psychological problems whatsoever. Neither has Susan. Although she considers herself a very sensitive person who always cries at movies and feels a lot of empathy for others, especially children, this is partly why the couple decided to become foster parents. We have 4-year-old Jody and 18-month-old brother Jimmy, who came to live with Ralph and Susan 3 months ago. Shortly before coming to live with Ralph and Susie, the children witnessed their father fatally shoot their mother and then commit suicide. The children, on the other hand, stayed in the apartment alone with their parents' bodies. They also experienced, for Jody, she was afraid to open the door and seek help because of something her father had taught her. So she stayed inside and she took care of her younger brother. Jody tried to revive her parents. Jimmy cried for his mama and became frustrated when Jody could not rouse her. Several times during the 2 days, he nestled in next to her body, seeking comfort. After 2 days, police finally arrived and took the children into custody. As we reviewed the story, It's important to keep in mind that by the time the children came to live with Ralph and Susan, details of the story had been all over TV and in the newspaper. Susan already had pictures in her head that came from this coverage. The children had walked through their parents' blood and left bloody footprints all over the house. And blood and bodily fluids were spattered all over the walls. Important thing to note about Jimmy is that he had been found curled up in a fetal position in a corner by his mother's body. So all of this stuff for Ralph and Susan, these are the pictures and images that were already in their head based on just reports from the police and newspaper that they had already witnessed prior to the kids coming into their care. It is observable that the children are impacted by these incidents that happened that they witnessed in their lifetime. Jimmy, for example, has stopped walking and would crawl around or pull himself along on the ground. Jimmy sometimes freezes in position and falls over flat, and he also has nightmares. Jody, on the other hand, tends to put blankets on her doll and reacts to Cheerios and red tablecloth as trauma reminders. What were Susan's traumatic stress reactions? Susan began to have intrusive images of the children's trauma, from reminders of things that she had witnessed already on TV, in the newspaper, and things that she had already heard from what from what Jody was able to share already. She got nervous and jumpy, especially when helping Jody in the bathroom. She began to have nightmares about the shooting, or she was afraid to have nightmares about the shooting. She had a desire to avoid future exposure to trauma. Susan's symptoms overall began to interfere with her life and her ability to take care of children. Ralph had a little bit of a different reaction to the traumatic stress. He lost interest in intimacy with his wife. He withdrew and felt disconnected completely from the children. A sense of hopelessness grew within him. He questioned his ability to help children, and in particular, these children. So what can Ralph and Susan do? One, to help themselves, and two, to help the children. Well, let's talk. Well, one of the things that they can do is remind themselves that the children are safe and that the traumatic events that led to them being in their home are now over. Work hard to distinguish between their own interpretations and fantasies of what the trauma was like for the children and the children's actual experiences. Another thing they can do is focus on the children's immediate concerns and present day lives. They can also continue to build on the children's resiliency and strengths. Jody's strengths include the wherewithal to keep herself and her brother alive, a strong, loving bond with her little brother, and the ability to talk about what happened and try to make sense of it. Jimmy's strengths include his strong, loving bond with his sister and the ability to take comfort from Susan and Ralph. They can also try not to generalize. Also, take frequent timeouts from parenting. Parenting is hard. And if you're giving everything you have 100% of the time, you're going to burn your engine out. So take timeouts. Lastly, seek support from family, from friends, clergy, trauma-focused therapists, somebody that you trust and somebody that you can talk to about this living situation. Just as there are ways to help children overcome their traumatic past, there are steps that we can take when we start to feel overwhelmed by secondary traumatic stress. One of the most fundamental steps is to remind ourselves that the children are now safe. The traumatic events, no matter how terrible, happened in the past. It is important for Susan to remind herself that the traumas are over and that the children are safe now. 2. Distinguish adult interpretation from the child's experience. When we react to our children's traumas, we may get lost in the big picture horror of what went through. It can be helpful to distinguish our interpretations of what they experienced from their immediate concerns. For example, Susan can help the child to grieve for their parents and focus on the good experiences the children are having now. Ralph can help himself by not generalizing from the children's very rare experience to the world in general. Although there are limitations to what he can do, he and Susan can still have a very important positive impact on the children's lives. Lastly, focus on resiliency and building positive experience. It is also important to remember that all children have strengths that we can encourage and build upon. When your child's trauma is a reminder, many resource parents are drawn to this work because they want to save other children from going through what they went through. Because of this, we may understand better than others exactly what our children are feeling. You may react as you would to any trauma reminder. A child's trauma may also serve as a trauma reminder and cause us to react as we've seen our children react, with nervousness, re-experiencing nightmares, avoidance, and so on. When a child's trauma reminds us of our own, we can lose perspective and have trouble differentiating our experience from our children's. If a particular strategy worked for us, we might expect it to work for our child and become frustrated if our child rejects it. We may also respond inappropriately or under or overreact to the child's trauma-related behaviors and reactions. We may even find ourselves withdrawing from the child as a way of avoiding the reminder. In the following story that we're going to read, we'll see how one mother was challenged when her foster daughter's experience reminded her of something from her own past, as she had worked very hard to forget. I'm going to read you the story of Betty and Janice. Betty is a 50-year-old African-American woman who has successfully fostered 2 adolescent boys. She became a foster mom to help other children overcome the hardships she faced growing up poor in the inner city. Betty put herself through school and now has a job. She is very active in her church, where she has lots of friends. Janice is Betty's 13-year-old African-American foster daughter. She was placed with Betty when she was 11 years old. She was removed from the home of her chronologically mentally ill single mom after years of neglect. She told her caseworker matter-of-factly that her mother's boyfriend had sexually abused her since she was 6. When she came to Betty, she hardly knew how to groom herself. She wasn't very good at making friends. Other kids made fun of her and wouldn't let her eat at their lunch table. For the first year and a half of her placement, Janice and Betty got along very well. At church, Janice enjoyed singing in the youth choir. Her self-esteem improved, and she learned to take pride in her appearance. As problems developed, around the time Janice turned 13, Betty started complaining to the caseworker. She said that Janice dawdled over her homework, listened to hip hop music, and practiced freak dancing around the house. One day, Betty called the caseworker and asked for respite care. She said, "You've got to help me out. I just can't handle this girl." The caseworker had never heard Betty sound so frazzled, even when her boys had gotten into some serious misbehavior. Finally, Betty blurted out the story. During lunch at school, Janice had been caught inviting boys into an out of the way bathroom. She encouraged them to touch her private parts, and she touched theirs. "It's not as if she just went along with the boys," Betty explained. "She initiated it." Betty began to cry. "I'm so ashamed. What if the ladies at my church find out?" The caseworker explained to Betty that children who have been sexually abused may act out sexually with peers, younger children, or adults. Sexual issues may surface or become more intense at adolescence. Janice probably had confusing and conflicted feelings about sex and intimacy, and since she had so much trouble making friends, sex was one way she could get boys' attention. Janice entered trauma-focused therapy. Betty was asked to attend some sessions in the therapist's office. Betty became more and more uncomfortable as Janice was encouraged to talk about what happened with her mother's boyfriend. Betty felt like crawling out of her skin. She said to the therapist, "What's the point of spending all this time talking about the bad things that happened to her? It's better just to forget about it and move on." At home, Janice would try to talk to Betty about boys, but Betty shut down. She felt angry at Janice and ashamed. Whenever Janice tried to give her a hug, Betty stiffened and pulled away. Janice and Betty started to argue about everything: chores around the house, homework, and the fact that Janice wanted to go to school dances rather than church events. About halfway through Janice's therapy, Betty called the caseworker and said, "You've got to get this girl out of my house." In a meeting with the caseworker, Betty cried and explained that she had come upon Janice naked, masturbating on the bed. The caseworker tried to reassure Betty that masturbation was normal adolescent behavior. Why didn't Betty just set limits by telling her daughter that masturbation was private and that she could shut her bedroom door? On hearing this, Betty began to sob. She revealed to the caseworker that she had been sexually abused herself. Once as a young girl by a relative, and then again as a teenager when she was raped by a friend. Janice's experience had brought back a flood of disconnected and disturbing images and feelings. Betty had never told anyone about her sexual abuse. She had simply put it out of her mind and turned to God. She had never had much of a sex life, but that wasn't important to her. Her approach had worked for 30 years. Now it was all coming back. "I don't think I can get through this with Janice," she told the caseworker. "Maybe you'd better place her somewhere else." So let's review. So we have Betty, who is a 50-year-old African-American woman. She put herself through school and has a good job. She's very active in the church setting and has successfully previously raised 2 foster sons. She's motivated to help other children escape the pain of her own inner city girlhood. Let's talk about Janice. Janice is Betty's 13-year-old African-American foster daughter. Remember, she was removed from her home of her single mother, who was chronically mentally ill. She was neglected during much of her childhood and was sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend between the ages of 6 to 11. She lacks social skills and has trouble making friends. And she lacks basic life skills. For Janice, placement went well until she enters adolescence. Betty complains Janice dawdles over her homework and freak dances. Janice gets into trouble at school. Betty is angry and ashamed that she can't handle this girl. Why can't she handle this girl? So what ends up happening? So Janice enters trauma-focused treatment to work on her sexual abuse issues. Betty participates in early session, then makes excuses not to come. Again, remember what was happening with Betty at the time. Janice wants to talk to Betty about boys, but Betty shuts her down. Betty pulls away when Janice tries to get close. So any sort of attempt by Janice to try to get close to Betty, Betty is not having any of it at this time. In the story, Betty is really going through it and struggling internally because of things that she has faced in the past. The relationship, their relationship, is in crisis. On the one hand, you have Betty, the foster mom. You've got to get this girl out of my house, telling the social worker that she can't handle it anymore. Janice, on the other hand, is confused, unsure of what to think. Why is my foster mother or mom rejecting me? So what's really going on with Janice and Betty? All right. Well, we can see that Janice's behavior has reminded Betty of her own trauma. We can also see that Betty is having a hard time separating old feelings about what happened to her from current feelings about Janice. Also, Betty never worked through her feelings about her own abuse and never wanted to. Just moving on worked best for her. So now she would like Janice to cope the same way she did. What can Betty do to help herself? One is that she can acknowledge the connection between Janice's experience and her own traumatic history. She can also recognize which feelings belong to the present and which to the past. So she will be less inclined to blame Janice for what she is feeling. Also, being honest with herself and Janice. Let Janice know that what she is going through reminds Betty of experiences in her own life, and that it makes her uncomfortable and confused. As well as accept her own limitations when the situation becomes too emotionally charged. She may need to take time out for herself. She can also reach out for support from her minister, extended family, and friends. What can Betty do to help Janice? Well, it's important that she recognize that her approach, putting the trauma out of her mind and just moving on, may not be effective for Janice. Most trauma experts believe that Janice will have a better life if she can talk about and make sense of what happened to her rather than attempting to just forget and move on. The price of Betty's approach may have been the loss of an intimate relationship with a man. While this might have been okay for Betty, Janice would like to grow up and get married, so she will need help learning to have a healthy, intimate relationship. She can also help Janice get the support Betty could not provide from others. For example, Betty can tell Janice romance and being with a man are not something that has ever been important to me in my life. Maybe you can talk to Aunt Jocelyn about this instead. She has girls your age and might know more about the subject than I do. The story of Betty and Janice is a powerful example of how a child's trauma and reaction to trauma can serve as a trauma reminder for a resource parent and can actually threaten a placement. Coping with a child's trauma is a reminder that things can be challenging, but it can also be an opportunity for healing and growth. If a child in your care is triggering unexpected or intense feelings, reactions, or memories of past trauma, it is important to 1. Make sure you recognize the connection between your reactions and your own trauma history. Also, distinguish which feelings are about what is happening at the moment and which feelings are related to your past experience. 3. Be honest with yourself, your child, and your caseworker about what is happening. This will make it easier to keep the lines of communication open and keep your child from feeling that he or she has done something wrong. 4. Reach out for support. No matter how many years have passed since your own traumatic experience, trauma-focused therapy can help you work through the effects of trauma and the effects it has had on your life and on your relationship with your child. Finally, accept that no matter what choice you make in dealing with your own trauma, what works for you may not work for your child or anybody else for that matter. At the beginning of this module, we talked about the importance of self-care. Now that we've looked at just how stressful caring for a traumatized child can be, we're going to work on creating an individualized plan for reducing that stress. The goal of the self-care plan is to help you maintain balance between work and relaxation, and between your commitments to others and to yourself. Should also be noted and include activities that you do purely for fun. It should also include a regular stress management approach, such as a physical activity you enjoy, meditation, yoga, or prayer, etc. So, in the following, and as part of the attachments that you have received, again, the attachment link is located where the link is for this video. You will have a page entitled Self-Care Plan. Please pull that page out, and if you have time, please follow along with us and participate in filling that page out. As we have given you some time to begin working on your self-care plan, as you go through this activity, just think about the things that relax you, that make you happy, the things that you love to do for fun. In the middle of the chaos that you experience every day, because yes, we might have a zillion things to do on a daily basis, we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves. So, things that you can do to take care of yourself on a daily basis, you will write those down where it says once a day. Things that you can do that are maybe just a little bit more challenging, you can do and indicate it on the once a week. And things that are costly or take a lot more planning, you can do those and indicate those on the once a month. We've given you some examples. So for example, things that you can do daily: walk the dog, play with the cat, exercise, pray, meditate, read a romance novel, write in my journal, chat with my neighbors, deep breathe, listen to music in the car. Any of these can actually be used in your once a week and or once a month as well. So for example, if you are not much of a reader, but every once in a while you like to read, or you'd like to include it in your weekly occurrences, you could put read a romance novel or read a novel, any novel, in your once a week. Same goes with walking the dog, or playing with the cat, or deep breathing. It may be that you don't have time for meditation every day, but you want to include it in the list of activities that you do to take care of yourself. Okay? Here is also a list of things that you can do on a monthly basis. For example, play cards, go bowling, have a nice dinner out with your partner, get a manicure, pedicure, etc. Go out with a group of friends, attend a support group meeting, go to the movies. Of course, you can't go to the movies in times of COVID, but you can also attend religious services. Hopefully, some of these activities start coming back and we come into more or closer to a much more normal reality and situation in terms of these larger group events. Well, we've come to the end of the last module of the workshop. We've covered a lot during these sessions, so before we conclude, let's take some time to put it all together. We've talked about recognizing the impact trauma has had on your child. We've talked about helping your child feel safe and how to. We've talked about helping your child to understand and manage overwhelming behaviors and emotions. We've also talked about helping your child to understand and modify problem behaviors, as well as respect and support positive, stable, and enduring relationships in their life. Help your child. We've also talked about how to help your child develop a strength-based understanding of his or her own life story. We've helped you in finding better ways to be an advocate for your child. We've helped you finding better ways to promote and support trauma-focused assessment and treatment for your child. And finally, we've gone over how to take care of yourself and why that's important for daily interaction when working with kids that come from hard places and have been traumatized, such as the kids in foster care. I would like to thank everybody for joining us and here, your VMS staff, in this amazing experience while we talked about caring for children who have experienced trauma. Hopefully, you have found new light in terms of finding new ways to work with the children that you currently have in your homes. Remember, please make sure to always take care of yourself so that you can be the best help and support for the kids and the people around you. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have enjoyed.